He lived fast, died young, and became a legend. James Dean wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural eruption, a symbol of rebellion carved into the golden age of Hollywood. In only 3 films, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant, he captured the restless soul of a generation torn between tradition and defiance. But behind the piercing glare and timeless smirk was a lonely young man, shaped by a troubled Indiana childhood, haunted by the loss of his mother, and desperate to find meaning, love, and peace. His rise from dusty Midwest roots to the backlots of Warner Brothers was meteoric, and his fall tragically sudden. This is the untold journey of James Dean, the loner, the lover, the outlaw, the icon. We'll uncover his secret romances, rare audition reels, deep obsession with method acting, and eerie fascination with death that seemed to stalk him to the end. Through first-hand accounts, unseen letters, and chilling moments before the crash that ended it all, we piece together the real James Dean, raw, complex, and unforgettable. This isn't just a story about fame. It's a revelation of the man behind the myth. Welcome to the definitive documentary on the shooting star who still burns through time. The screen flickers to life. A young man stands alone on a darkened street, collar up, cigarette dangling, eyes locked on something far beyond the camera. That image, brooding, still, electric, has echoed across generations. He wasn't in hundreds of movies, didn't live to collect trophies or walk countless red carpets. He starred in only 3 films. Yet James Dean didn't need a long career to change everything. He did it in a flash. A storm that swept across Hollywood, exploded into pop culture, and then vanished, leaving behind a legend that would only grow stronger with time. This is the story of a boy who became a myth. Born into the quiet farmlands of Indiana, James Dean came from a world where dreams rarely made it past the front porch. But something burned inside him. An ache, a hunger, a yearning for something more. He chased it to the stages of New York, to the sound stages of Los Angeles, and ultimately into the hearts of millions. In East of Eden, he cracked open the screen with raw emotion. In Rebel Without a Cause, he gave voice to the silent rage of a generation. And in Giant, he proved he could stand shoulder to shoulder with Hollywood royalty. With just those 3 roles, Dean changed what it meant to be a movie star. But this documentary is not just about the icon. It's about the man behind the myth. The lonely kid abandoned too soon by a mother he adored. The restless soul who never felt at home anywhere. The outsider who turned pain into art. James Dean lived with intensity, both on screen and off. He devoured life in fragments, lovers, friendships, fast cars, and late-night phone calls. He kept secrets, protected his truth, and lived like time was running out. And in many ways, it was. We begin this journey not at the start, but at the end. September 30th, 1955, Dean behind the wheel of his beloved Porsche Spyder, barreling down a California highway. At just 24 years old, his life would end in a twisted wreck of metal and silence. The news sent shockwaves across the world. His death wasn't just tragic, it was symbolic, the violent punctuation to a sentence Hollywood was still writing. What followed wasn't the slow fade of memory, it was the ignition of legend. In the years that followed, his face became a symbol of eternal youth, his image frozen in time like a statue built from film and fire. His legacy would echo in the work of Brando, Newman, De Niro, and DiCaprio. His name would inspire songs, books, fashion, and entire cultural movements. But what was it exactly about James Dean that made him unforgettable? Why, decades after his final scene, does he still haunt us? This documentary is a search for that answer. Over the next 2 hours, we'll peel back the layers through rare footage, intimate letters, untold stories, and the voices of those who knew him best. We'll walk the same roads he did, feel the weight he carried, and witness the talent that lit up like a flare and then disappeared. This isn't just a look at a Hollywood star. It's a journey into the mind of a boy who became a mirror for an entire generation. The misunderstood, the rebellious, the dreamers. James Dean spoke for them all. He lived like a shooting star, blazing through the sky for one brief moment. And when he vanished, he left behind not darkness, but a trail of light we still follow. This is
By the time James Dean graduated from Fairmount High School in 1949, he had already outgrown the quiet rhythm of small-town life. Though he was well-liked by some classmates and admired by teachers for his creativity, there was always a feeling that he didn't quite belong. He was restless, curious, and filled with a hunger for something more, something he couldn't quite name. Acting had planted its first seed in him during school plays, but now it was beginning to take root. The applause, the ability to embody someone else, to express what he couldn't say out loud, that power had ignited a deeper calling. And so, with dreams and uncertainty packed into a suitcase, he set out for California once again. Los Angeles in the early 1950s was a city of dreams and illusions, and James arrived as a stranger to both. He briefly enrolled at Santa Monica College to study pre-law, likely a compromise to ease his father's disappointment, but his heart wasn't in it. The pull of performance, of emotional truth, drew him away from traditional paths. He transferred to UCLA and switched his major to theater. That decision would become the first concrete step toward discovering his voice, not just as an actor, but as a person determined to say something real in a world that often rewarded masks. At UCLA, he found a more accepting environment, one that welcomed eccentricity and emotional depth. He joined the university's theater group, appearing in student productions that showcased his natural intensity. One of his earliest roles was as Malcolm in Macbeth, where his fierce commitment and magnetic stage presence began to turn heads. Dean's performances weren't polished in the classical sense, but they were undeniably powerful. He wasn't acting so much as revealing, pulling raw, unfiltered emotion to the surface in a way that made even small scenes feel volcanic. It was during this time that he met James Whitmore, an actor and mentor who would play a crucial role in shaping his early development. Whitmore encouraged him to pursue professional acting and helped connect him with the Actors Studio in New York, a mecca for those committed to the raw, immersive technique of method acting. Dean was fascinated by this philosophy. He didn't want to pretend on screen. He wanted to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances. He wanted to feel everything, to mean every word, to break through the artifice of performance and reveal something authentic. But even before New York, Dean began seeking work in Hollywood. He appeared in a few television commercials and scored uncredited parts in a handful of films. One of his earliest speaking roles was in Fixed Bayonets, 1951, where his screen time was brief, but his presence was unmistakable. Casting directors didn't always know what to do with him. He was too intense, too unpredictable. But those who looked closer saw something electric, a young man who didn't fit into the clean-cut mold of 1950s leading men, but who carried the weight of something deeper, more dangerous. To support himself, Dean took odd jobs, parking cars, working as a stunt tester for a game show, even appearing as a live test subject in a UCLA psychology study on human reactions. These gigs paid the bills, but they never distracted him from his purpose. He was studying people constantly, watching how they moved, how they spoke, how they revealed their emotions through silence. Everything was material. Everything was fuel. This period was not glamorous. It was filled with rejection, loneliness, and struggle. But it was also the crucible where James Dean began to forge his voice, not one shaped by the demands of fame, but one born from honesty, observation, and emotional risk. In a city that demanded conformity, he chose to be different, and that difference was beginning to shine.
Hollywood in the early 1950s was a city shimmering with illusion. Beneath the glamour, it was a brutal proving ground, especially for young actors who didn't fit the mold. And James Dean didn't fit any mold. He was neither the polished heartthrob nor the square-jawed hero studios preferred. He was wiry, restless, unpredictable, more poetry than polish. Yet somehow, that rawness is exactly what would begin to attract the right kind of attention. Hollywood was beginning to change, ever so slightly, and Dean arrived at just the right moment. After gaining confidence and experience at UCLA, James dropped out in 1951 and focused entirely on his acting career. He took on small television parts in live dramas like Danger and Studio One, and appeared briefly in films such as Sailor Beware and Has Anybody Seen My Gal? These were modest, often forgettable roles, but they served a vital purpose. Dean was learning the camera. He was also learning how to maneuver in a town where talent wasn't always enough. Connections, timing, and resilience mattered just as much. He worked part-time as a parking lot attendant at CBS Studios while chasing auditions, watching stars walk in and out, all the while knowing he was meant to be on the other side of the glass. In these early Hollywood years, Dean became close with a group of other aspiring actors and artists, many of whom shared his intense passion and emotional sensitivity. He spent time at coffee shops and acting workshops, scribbling thoughts in notebooks, sketching people, reciting Shakespeare under his breath. He was rarely seen without a book, a cigarette, or both. Friends described him as distant yet magnetic, a young man who could shift from laughter to silence in seconds. He was a mystery, even to those who thought they knew him best. But what truly separated Dean from the countless dreamers flooding Los Angeles was his approach to the craft. He wasn't looking for stardom, he was looking for truth. He devoured the teachings of Stanislavski and the method movement and began a correspondence with Lee Strasberg's actor studio in New York. He studied Marlon Brando's performances obsessively, watching A Streetcar Named Desire multiple times, not just to emulate Brando, but to understand what made him real. There was an emotional purity in that kind of acting that spoke to Dean's soul. Then came the turning point. In 1951, Dean was accepted into the actor's studio, and he left Hollywood behind temporarily to immerse himself in the world of New York theater. But Hollywood hadn't forgotten him. When he returned a few years later, the industry had changed. Television was booming, and studios were beginning to take chances on new kinds of talent. Dean's work in New York, including a lauded performance in The Immoralist on Broadway, had stirred curiosity. People began to whisper about the strange, intense young actor who could make even silence feel dangerous. His big break came when director Elia Kazan, already known for shaping careers like Brando's, saw something in Dean. Kazan was casting for East of Eden, a film adaptation of John Steinbeck's novel. The story required a complicated young man, a character torn by guilt, desperate for love, angry at the world. Dean didn't just fit the role of Cal Trask, he embodied it. His screen test stunned the Warner Brothers team. There was no question, this wasn't just a good actor, this was someone who could break the screen open. Warner Brothers signed Dean to a contract and suddenly everything shifted. He moved into a modest apartment, bought a motorcycle, and began rehearsals with Kazan. He studied the role obsessively, writing in journals, exploring Cal's pain as if it were his own. In truth, it was. The themes of rejection, father-son conflict, and the aching need for approval mirrored Dean's own life so closely that acting became something more than performance. It became personal redemption. Hollywood, at last, had beckoned. But James Dean wasn't walking through its gates like the stars who came before him. He arrived with his collar up, his brow furrowed, and his heart wide open. He brought his pain, his silence, his contradictions, and dared the world to look away.
Landing east of Eden. In early 1954, James Dean's life changed forever. He had returned from New York, where he had sharpened his skills at the Actors Studio and performed on Broadway. Now, back in Hollywood, he was hungry for something real. That opportunity came when director Elia Kazan was casting for East of Eden, an adaptation of John Steinbeck's novel. Kazan needed someone special to play Cal Trask, a complex, emotional young man who feels unloved by his father and struggles to understand his place in the world. Many actors auditioned, but no one quite captured the raw pain and quiet rebellion Kazan was looking for. Then, Dean walked in. He wasn't flashy or polished, but there was something in his eyes, something unsettled and deep. His screen test was quiet, intense, almost awkward. But Kazan saw past that. He saw honesty. He saw a young man who didn't just understand Cal, he was Cal. Dean was officially cast, and with that, his real journey into Hollywood began. The film was produced by Warner Bros., and it would be the first major movie role of his career. Dean poured himself into the character. He read the script over and over, filled notebooks with Cal's thoughts, and constantly questioned Kazan about his motivations. Offset, he stayed distant from most of the cast, especially Raymond Macy, who played his father in the film. Macy found Dean difficult. He didn't follow traditional acting methods. He mumbled lines and sometimes ignored direction. But Dean wasn't being disrespectful. He was using method acting. He believed that keeping distance from Macy would add real tension to their scenes. It worked. When Cal pleads for his father's approval or breaks down in frustration, the emotion feels completely real. Dean wasn't acting for the camera, he was living the role. Even Kazan admitted later that Dean brought something to the film that no one else could have. He didn't just perform Cal's emotions, he revealed his own. When East of Eden was released in 1955, audiences saw something different, something electric. Most Hollywood stars at the time were clean-cut, confident, and charming. But Dean's Cal Trask was unsure, angry, and aching for love. His performance hit people in the gut. He showed that it was okay to be vulnerable, to be lost, to feel too much. Critics praised his work, and Warner Bros. Realized they had something special. Suddenly, James Dean was no longer just another actor. He was a rising star. His name started spreading through the industry. Even John Steinbeck, who had doubts at first, admitted that Dean brought Cal to life in ways he hadn't imagined. Dean's performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, the first time anyone had ever been nominated posthumously in that category. Although the award would come after his death, the recognition confirmed what many already knew. James Dean had arrived, and he had done it on his own terms. East of Eden was more than just a film debut. It was the moment when a quiet, misunderstood boy from Indiana stepped into the spotlight and changed the course of American cinema.
Icon of youth, rebel without a cause. After the success of East of Eden, James Dean became a name that people in Hollywood couldn't ignore. Warner Bros. Saw his potential and quickly cast him in a new film, Rebel Without a Cause. Directed by Nicholas Ray, the film told the story of Jim Stark, a troubled teenager who moves to a new town and struggles with family pressure, confusion, and isolation. It was one of the first movies to take the emotions of young people seriously. At a time when teenagers were often seen as background characters or comic relief, Rebel Without a Cause put them at the center. Dean connected deeply with the role. Like Jim Stark, he had felt misunderstood, abandoned by his father, and lost in a world that didn't seem to offer answers. His pain was real, and the screen captured every ounce of it. From the opening scene where Jim curls up drunk in the street to his quiet moments of fear and longing, Dean didn't just act. He revealed something many young people had never seen in film: themselves. Working on Rebel Without a Cause was different for Dean. He had more freedom to shape the character, and director Nicholas Ray encouraged it. The cast also included Natalie Wood as Judy and Saul Mineo as Plato, two characters who also felt like outsiders. Together, the trio created a powerful dynamic that mirrored real teenage struggles, searching for love, dealing with broken families, and wanting to belong. Dean's friendship with Mineo and Wood was strong off-camera, too, and it added a natural chemistry to their scenes. On set, Dean continued using method acting, staying emotionally close to his character, even between takes. He often improvised or changed lines to feel more truthful. One of the film's most iconic scenes, when Jim shouts, "You're tearing me apart," was improvised and came straight from Dean's own frustration. That line would go on to define the emotional heart of the film. The raw energy he brought made the character unforgettable. For the first time, audiences saw a teen movie that wasn't a comedy or a moral lesson. It was real, messy, and deeply human. When Rebel Without a Cause hit theaters in October 1955, just a few weeks after Dean's death, it became an instant cultural event. Teenagers saw their own fears, anger, and confusion reflected on screen, and they embraced Dean as their voice. He became a symbol of youth in pain, someone who didn't have the answers but wasn't afraid to ask the questions. The red jacket he wore in the film became an icon. His quiet defiance, his quick movements, his wounded stare, they created an entirely new kind of movie star. Critics praised his performance, calling it brave and unforgettable. But more than that, Dean gave a face to a generation that felt left out. He helped start a new kind of cinema, one that took young people seriously and explored the emotions no one else dared to show. Though Dean would never live to see how powerful the film would become, Rebel Without a Cause turned him into a legend. Even now, decades later, Jim Stark still speaks to anyone who has ever felt lost, angry, or alone. And James Dean remains the timeless voice of that silent storm.
After Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean was offered his biggest role yet, a leading part in Giant, a sweeping drama based on Edna Ferber's novel. The film told the story of a wealthy Texas ranching family and the social changes they face over several decades, touching on themes of love, class, and racism. Dean was cast as Jet Rink, a poor ranch hand who rises to power through oil money and becomes a bitter, lonely figure. It was a massive production, starring Hollywood legends Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor. Unlike his previous roles, Jet Rink required Dean to play the same character across many years, from a young, shy laborer to an aging drunken millionaire. Dean saw this as a huge challenge and threw himself into the part. He studied oil workers, changed his voice and posture, and even had fake teeth made to help show Jet's aging transformation. He wanted every detail to feel real. While Hudson and Taylor were polished and experienced, Dean brought an unpredictable energy to the set that kept everyone on edge, but also impressed them deeply. On the set of Giant, Dean was both admired and misunderstood. Director George Stevens was a perfectionist and often clashed with Dean's method acting style. Dean liked to improvise and stay in character, while Stevens expected actors to follow the script closely. But despite the tension, Dean delivered powerful work. His scenes with Hudson were especially electric. The two men had very different styles. Hudson was calm and traditional, while Dean was emotional and spontaneous, which created real friction on screen. Elizabeth Taylor, on the other hand, got along well with Dean. She saw his pain and protected his spirit, even when others didn't fully understand him. During breaks, they shared deep conversations and laughs, forming a quiet friendship. One of Dean's most haunting moments in the film comes near the end, when the older Jet Rink stumbles through a banquet, drunk and broken. Dean studied footage of real alcoholics to prepare for the scene, and the result was both painful and unforgettable. Stevens, who had doubted Dean's approach at times, later admitted that the young actor had created something remarkable. Dean had proven he could play not just a troubled youth, but a full, complex man over time. Tragically, James Dean would never see the finished film. Just days after wrapping his final scenes, he died in a car crash on September 30th, 1955. When Giant was released the following year, audiences watched it knowing they were seeing Dean's final performance. The impact was huge. Critics praised his transformation, calling it mature, layered, and deeply moving. He was nominated for another Academy Award for Best Actor, making him the first person in history to receive 2 posthumous nominations in that category. Giant showed the world that Dean wasn't just a symbol of youth, he was a serious actor with depth, range, and discipline. The film itself became a classic, and Jet Rink became one of Dean's most iconic characters. His final triumph wasn't about fame. It was about proving that he could do more than rebel. He could evolve. He could disappear into a role.
Giant was the last piece of his short but unforgettable journey, and it confirmed what many already believed. James Dean was not only a star, he was an artist. His light may have gone out, but in that last performance, he burned brighter than ever.
James Dean didn't just act, he felt, lived, and breathed his characters. His commitment to method acting shaped every part of his brief but brilliant career. While studying in New York, he was accepted into the prestigious Actors Studio, led by Lee Strasberg. This was the heart of the method movement in America, inspired by Russian actor-director Konstantin Stanislavski's techniques. At the Actors Studio, Dean learned that acting wasn't about pretending, it was about truth. Actors were encouraged to pull from their own memories and emotions, to become the role from the inside out. Dean soaked up everything. He wasn't interested in fame or charm, he wanted to be honest. When he played a character, he didn't fake sadness or joy. He reached into his own life, into the grief of losing his mother, into the loneliness he carried since childhood, and poured it into every scene. This was what made his performances so real. Whether he was screaming in rage or sitting in silence, the audience could feel what he felt. But Dean's obsession with truth came at a cost. On set, he was often difficult to work with, not because he was arrogant, but because he was intense. He would ask directors deep questions about every line, every moment. He wasn't satisfied with just hitting marks or memorizing dialogue. He needed to understand the soul of a scene. During East of Eden, he avoided talking much with Raymond Macy, who played his father, to build real tension between them. On Rebel Without a Cause, he stayed emotionally connected to his character even between takes, sometimes walking off alone or sitting quietly to stay in the right state of mind. Co-stars often didn't know what to make of him. Some thought he was strange, others admired his focus. Natalie Wood once said that Dean made acting feel like a confession, not a performance. Directors like Elia Kazan and Nicholas Ray recognized that Dean's approach wasn't easy, but it was special. His method acting brought something new to American film, a raw, unfiltered kind of truth that audiences weren't used to seeing. Dean also drew inspiration from those he admired. He studied Marlon Brando's performances closely, especially in A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront. He wasn't trying to copy Brando, but he respected how Brando could disappear into a character. Dean often wrote about acting in his journals, asking himself questions like, "What does this character need?" Or "What do I fear in this scene?" He saw acting as more than a job. It was a way of surviving, a way of expressing what he couldn't say in real life. This deep emotional connection to his craft sometimes left him drained. Friends noticed how much it took out of him. He was known to replay painful memories to bring out emotions, especially memories of his mother's death or his father's absence. Acting for Dean was never safe. It was personal, exposed, and deeply felt. And yet, that's what made his performances unforgettable. Even in scenes where he said little, his eyes told stories. His body language spoke volumes. He made silence louder than words. His obsession with method acting wasn't a trend or a tool. It was the center of who he was as an artist.
Behind James Dean's fame, behind the cameras and fame and fast cars, was a young man who often felt deeply alone. Though he was surrounded by growing attention, he remained private, guarded, and hard to truly know. Much of this came from his early life. Losing his mother at age 9 and being sent away by his father left emotional scars he never fully healed from. Dean rarely spoke about his grief, but those close to him said it lived in his silences. In letters and journals, he hinted at feeling like an outsider, someone always watching life from a distance. While his fame made him a heartthrob, in real life, Dean found relationships difficult. He feared getting too close to people, and many who knew him said he could be warm one moment and withdrawn the next. This mix of charm and distance made him hard to pin down. He needed love, but didn't always know how to accept it.
There were several important people in Dean's personal life, though much about his romances remains clouded in mystery. One of his most well-known relationships was with Italian actress Pier Angeli. The two met at Warner Bros. And quickly grew close. Angeli later described Dean as sweet, thoughtful, and troubled. Their bond was strong, but it was tested by outside pressures. Her mother disapproved of Dean, believing he was too wild and unstable. The studio system also had its hand in controlling young stars' images. Eventually, Pierre married singer Vic Damone, and Dean was reportedly devastated. On the day of her wedding, he sat across from the church on his motorcycle, watching from a distance. Some friends claimed he never truly recovered from losing her. Over the years, rumors and speculation have surrounded Dean's private life, including questions about his sexuality. He never publicly discussed it, and while some friends hinted that he may have had relationships with both men and women, the truth remains unclear. What's known for certain is that Dean was deeply emotional, easily hurt, and always searching for a connection that went beyond surface fame. Even with friends, Dean could be complicated. He formed close bonds with people like photographer Dennis Stock, playwright William Bast, and actress Elizabeth Taylor. Stock once said that Dean carried loneliness with him everywhere, and Bast, his college roommate and one of his earliest biographers, described their friendship as intense and full of emotional ups and downs. Dean loved to talk about art, poetry, and philosophy, but he also had a wild side, racing cars, disappearing for days, or playing pranks to mask his moods. He wrote letters filled with longing and reflection, often questioning his place in the world. Fame brought him attention, but not peace. In fact, it often made things harder. He didn't trust easily, and he feared being misunderstood. Many believe that acting was the only place he felt truly seen. In front of the camera, he could reveal his deepest feelings without having to explain them. Off camera, he remained a mystery. The man who captured the heart of a generation spent much of his own life trying to find love and peace, something that always seemed just out of reach. In the end, James Dean was more than a symbol of rebellion. He was a private, sensitive soul caught between loneliness and longing, always searching for a place to belong.
Section 10. Before James Dean became a star, he had to prove himself in front of the camera like every other young actor. Screen tests were his first real chance to show what he could do, not to a theater crowd, but to producers, directors, and studio executives looking for something special. One of the most revealing moments in Dean's early career was his screen test for East of Eden. In that short film reel, Dean didn't come across like a traditional actor reading lines. He was awkward, fidgeting, looking away from the camera at times, but he felt real. There was something raw in his performance, something not yet polished, but emotionally honest. Elia Kazan, the director, saw past the nervousness and noticed the depth. Dean wasn't acting for approval, he was reacting from within. That quality made him different from the beginning. He wasn't delivering a role, he was becoming it. Those early screen tests show a young man still figuring things out, but already filled with the electricity that would define him. On set, Dean continued to surprise people. His behavior behind the scenes wasn't always easy, but it was never fake. He would often stay in character between takes, especially during emotionally heavy scenes. Some directors and co-stars found this difficult to work with, but others admired the intensity. While filming Rebel Without a Cause, he built a strong bond with Nicholas Ray, who gave Dean space to explore his performance. Dean often improvised moments that weren't in the script, like small gestures, eye movements, or changes in tone that gave scenes more feeling. In one scene, when Jim Stark gently places his jacket over Plato's shoulders, it was Dean's idea, a moment of quiet connection that added deep emotional weight. During Giant, Dean's methods were more challenging. He clashed with director George Stevens, who preferred structure and order. Dean's constant changes, long pauses, and unpredictable style frustrated the crew. But Stevens admitted later that Dean's work was remarkable, especially his final scene as the aging Jet Rink. Dean's transformation, his voice slowed, his body stiffened, his energy drained, was the result of long observation and careful planning. It wasn't just acting, it was lived experience. Some of the most valuable insights into Dean's artistry come from rare behind-the-scenes footage and photos taken during rehearsals, camera tests, and breaks between filming. In these moments, Dean often seems both relaxed and intense, cracking jokes one minute, silently lost in thought the next. He was known for wandering off alone with a cigarette, sketchbook in hand, or lying flat on the ground staring at the sky. He studied other actors, asked endless questions about motivation, and watched how scenes played back on monitors. Photographer Dennis Stock, who captured some of Dean's most famous off-screen images, once said that Dean's truest self lived in the spaces between performances. In private, Dean was thoughtful, sometimes sad, but always present. The camera loved him not because he was handsome in a typical way, but because he brought everything inside him to the surface. His screen tests and behind-the-scenes moments remind us that Dean's magic wasn't just in his final scenes, it was in the process, in how he prepared, how he moved, how he felt. That's what made James Dean unforgettable. He didn't turn it on for the camera, he carried it with him always.
James Dean is remembered most for his acting, but behind the screen, he was a deeply curious young man with a wide range of passions. Acting was the heart of his identity, but it wasn't the only thing that gave him purpose. Dean had a love for art that started when he was a child. He enjoyed sketching, sculpting, and creating things with his hands. In quiet moments, he would draw scenes from his imagination or sketch people around him. His notebooks were filled with doodles, personal thoughts, and ideas for future projects. Music also played a big part in his life. He played the bongo drums and the violin, and he often listened to classical pieces, jazz, and opera. These weren't just hobbies to him. They were ways to express feelings he couldn't always say out loud. Dean didn't care for parties or big crowds. He preferred bookstores, art galleries, or long drives alone. In many ways, he was a quiet artist, trapped in the rising world of Hollywood noise. One of Dean's greatest passions outside of acting was speed, particularly auto racing. He loved cars not for show, but for the feeling they gave him. Driving made him feel free, focused, and alive. He started with motorcycles, riding through the hills of Los Angeles in solitude. Later, he bought a series of fast cars, including his famous silver 550 Spider. Racing became more than a thrill, it was a second identity. He entered several amateur races and even earned respectable placements. Though the studio became concerned about his growing interest in racing, especially during filming, Dean didn't want to stop. He respected the technical side of cars and studied them in detail. Mechanics, engines, timing, he wanted to understand it all. He wasn't just a thrill seeker, he was a student of the machine. In one interview, he said that racing made him feel like himself, stripped of fame, pressure, or roles, just a man and the road. That sense of freedom was something he rarely found elsewhere. Dean also had a growing interest in directing and photography. He was often seen carrying a camera, capturing small moments behind the scenes or on the streets. He talked to friends about writing scripts one day, even directing films about young people and their struggles. He had a vision of art that came from truth, not commercial success. Dean admired people like Charlie Chaplin, not just for acting, but for telling stories that mattered. He also read constantly, poetry, philosophy, psychology, and was especially drawn to the works of James Whitcomb Riley, Carl Jung, and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. These books helped him explore big questions about life, death, and identity.
Many who knew Dean said he would have gone far beyond acting if he had lived longer. He wasn't just a performer, he was a thinker, a seeker, a man with dreams that stretched far past the edge of a movie set. His passions made him who he was. They shaped the mystery of James Dean, not just the actor, but the artist the world was only beginning to see.
James Dean's love for speed wasn't a secret. It was one of the few things in his life that gave him a true sense of control. Away from the pressures of acting and the confusion of fame, the road gave him peace and excitement. After his early success in Hollywood, Dean began collecting cars and motorcycles. He started with a Triumph motorcycle, then moved on to a used MGTD sports car. But it was when he bought a Porsche 356 Super Speedster that his interest in racing became more serious. He entered amateur races in California and quickly impressed other drivers with his focus and skill. He didn't race to show off, he raced to feel alive. To Dean, racing wasn't just a thrill, it was a test of concentration, courage, and instinct. He studied the mechanics of cars, talked to professional racers, and began to see motorsport as more than a hobby. It was becoming a second career path, one he wanted to pursue between acting jobs. In September 1955, shortly after wrapping filming for Giant, Dean purchased a brand new silver Porsche 550 Spyder. He had it customized with the number 130 painted on the hood and doors, and the nickname, Little Bastard, written on the back. A phrase rumored to be an inside joke between Dean and his friend Bill Hickman. The car was sleek, fast, and dangerously powerful. Studio executives at Warner Brothers were worried about Dean's racing interest, especially since he was gaining fame and had contractual obligations. They banned him from racing while filming Giant, but now that production was complete, Dean was free to get back on the track. He planned to race the Porsche at the Salinas Road Races in Northern California on October 1st, 1955. Originally, Dean was going to tow the car to Salinas, but his mechanic and friend Rolf Wuterich suggested driving it instead to help break in the engine. That choice would turn out to be tragic. On September 30th, 1955, with Wuterich in the passenger seat, Dean set off from Los Angeles towards Salinas in his brand new Porsche. As they traveled north, several people noticed the car. It was beautiful, unusual, and caught the eye. At around 5:45 p.m. near the small town of Cholam, California, Dean's car collided with a 1950 Ford Tudor driven by a college student named Donald Turnipseed. The Ford made a left turn across the highway directly into Dean's path. The Porsche, low to the ground and fast, couldn't stop in time. The impact was violent. The car was crushed, spinning into a nearby ditch. Dean was killed almost instantly from a broken neck and multiple injuries. He was only 24 years old. Wuterich was thrown from the car and badly injured, but survived. Turnipseed, who had minor injuries, was not charged, and the crash was ruled an accident. News of Dean's death shocked the world. One moment, he was a rising star, young, bold, unforgettable. The next, he was gone. The Porsche 550 Spyder, once a symbol of freedom and power, became a symbol of fragility and fate. To this day, the car is surrounded by mystery, with rumors that its wrecked parts caused more accidents and deaths, earning it the nickname, the Curse of the Little Bastard. But beyond myth, the real story remains painfully human. A gifted young man who chased life too fast, and who paid the ultimate price. His passion brought him joy, but also danger. And in the end, it was on that open road, not a film set, where James Dean wrote his final scene. The morning of September 30th, 1955 began like any other for James Dean, but by nightfall, it would be remembered forever. Dean had just finished filming Giant and was excited to return to racing. He was planning to compete in the Salinas Road Races that weekend in Northern California. To prepare, he had recently purchased a sleek silver Porsche 550 Spyder,
a lightweight, powerful racing car. Dean named it Little Bastard, a nickname that reflected his rebellious image and mischievous humor. Early that day, Dean visited Competition Motors in Hollywood, where his mechanic and friend, Rolf Wuderich, finished tuning the Porsche. Dean originally planned to trailer the car up to Salinas, but Rolf suggested they drive the car instead to help break in the engine. Dean agreed. Around 1:30 p.m., Dean and Rolf left Los Angeles, with the Porsche following behind a station wagon carrying equipment and friends, including actor Bill Hickman. The group planned to stop for food along the way, relax during the drive, and arrive in Salinas by evening. As they drove north on US Route 99, Dean was pulled over around 3:30 p.m. in Kern County for speeding. He had been going 65 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. He received a warning but continued the journey undeterred. Along the route, Dean seemed in good spirits. Witnesses later recalled that he was joking, smoking, and excited about the upcoming race. Rolf sat beside him, giving directions and keeping an eye on the car's performance. Around 5:15 p.m., the small caravan stopped at a gas station in Blackwell's Corner, a common pit stop. Dean bought an apple and a Coca-Cola, smiled for a fan's camera, and talked briefly with a fellow racer. Then they got back on the road, heading west on State Route 46 toward Paso Robles. The sun was beginning to set and traffic was light. Just before 5:45 p.m., near the junction of Route 46 and Route 41 in Cholame, a black and white 1950 Ford Tudor traveling east made a sudden left turn across the highway. The driver, 23-year-old Donald Turnipseed, was attempting to enter Route 41 but misjudged the speed and distance of the oncoming Porsche. The crash was sudden and violent. Dean's Porsche, traveling about 85 miles per hour, slammed into the Ford almost head-on. The force of the collision launched the small car into the air and sent it crashing into a nearby ditch. Rolf Wuderich was thrown from the car and badly injured. Donald Turnipseed stumbled away with minor injuries, but James Dean was trapped inside. He suffered a broken neck, internal injuries, and multiple broken bones. Reports say he died within minutes, if not instantly. When an ambulance arrived, Dean was still alive but unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. at Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital. News of the crash spread quickly. By the next morning, headlines across the country read, "James Dean killed in auto crash." Hollywood was stunned. Fans were heartbroken. He was only 24 years old. Just one day earlier, he was making plans for future races and future roles. Now he was gone. That single moment froze him in time. Dean never aged, never faded, never faltered. His life ended at full speed, exactly how he had lived it. September 30th, 1955, was not just the day James Dean died. It was the day a legend was born.
News of James Dean's death hit like a thunderclap. By the morning of October 1st, 1955, radio stations and newspapers across the country were reporting that the 24-year-old rising star had been killed in a car crash the night before. For many, it didn't seem real. He had just wrapped filming Giant, and Rebel Without a Cause hadn't even been released yet. Dean was still on the edge of superstardom, but those who had seen East of Eden already knew he was something special. His death sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Fellow actors, directors, and producers were stunned. Elia Kazan, who had given Dean his first big break, was heartbroken. Elizabeth Taylor reportedly collapsed upon hearing the news. Rock Hudson, his co-star in Giant, was shaken. Though Dean had only completed 3 major films, the intensity of his performances and the mystery of his personality made his death feel like a massive loss, not just to the industry, but to art itself. Fans were devastated. Across America and overseas, young people wept as if they had lost someone they personally knew. Dean had become a symbol for the misunderstood, the lonely, the restless. In East of Eden, he had captured the ache of trying to win a father's love. In Rebel Without a Cause, he embodied the anger and confusion of being young in a world that didn't listen. Now, with his sudden death, those feelings were magnified. Teenagers pasted his photos on walls and kept newspapers with his face on the front page. Movie theaters filled with fans eager to watch Rebel Without a Cause when it released just weeks after his death. The film, already powerful, took on a haunting new meaning. Here was a boy crying out to be understood, only to vanish before he had a chance to grow. The red jacket, the anguished shout, "You're tearing me apart," became more than a performance. It was a real cry frozen in time. Dean had unknowingly filmed his own elegy. As days passed, tributes poured in from across the world. Poets, journalists, and critics tried to explain why James Dean's death mattered so much. It wasn't just because he was young and famous, it was because he had represented something deeper. He had tapped into emotions no one else had dared to show. He was both gentle and wild, quiet and explosive. He didn't play heroes or cowboys, he played broken boys who wanted to be loved. And now he was gone, leaving behind only 3 films, a few interviews, and a trail of mystery. His funeral was held on October 8, 1955, in Fairmount, Indiana, his hometown. Hundreds attended while thousands mourned from afar. The small Midwestern boy who once wandered cornfields alone was now an icon etched into history. James Dean's death was more than a tragedy. It was a turning point in American culture. It marked the end of innocence for many, and the beginning of a new kind of celebrity. Raw, flawed, and deeply human. The world hadn't just lost a promising actor, it had lost a mirror to its own soul.
James Dean's funeral was held on October 8, 1955, in Fairmount, Indiana, the quiet hometown where his story began. It was a deeply personal choice, one that reflected Dean's lifelong connection to the place he had once called both comforting and confining. His body had been flown back to Indiana after an autopsy in California confirmed what many already knew. His injuries were too severe to survive. The funeral was held at the Fairmount Friends Church, a modest Quaker building just blocks from where he had grown up with his aunt and uncle, Hortense and Marcus Winslow. Around 600 people packed the small church to say goodbye, while thousands more lined the surrounding streets in silence. Dean's bronze casket was opened during the service, and many attendees later said his face looked peaceful, as if asleep. The service was simple, as he would have wanted. No celebrities, no flashing cameras, just family, childhood friends, and a town mourning its most famous son. As the ceremony began, there was no dramatic speech or Hollywood tribute. Instead, the minister spoke gently about Jimmy, the boy they had watched ride his bike through the streets and act in school plays. His high school drama teacher attended, as did neighbors who remembered him playing the violin or drawing in notebooks at the local diner. There were no grand eulogies, only quiet tears. A few notes of music played. The Winslow family sat in the front row, heartbreak etched into their faces. Outside, the press waited, but respected the family's wishes to keep the event private. Back in Los Angeles, his co-stars and friends held their own small gatherings to remember him. Elizabeth Taylor, who was reportedly devastated, sent flowers. Elia Kazan and Nicholas Ray both issued heartfelt statements, calling Dean the most promising actor of his generation. But none of that touched the rawness of the small-town ceremony. There, in the Indiana fields, far from Hollywood lights, James Dean was remembered not as a star, but as a boy who left too soon. After the service, Dean's body was taken to Park Cemetery, a quiet spot on the edge of town. He was buried beneath a simple headstone that read, James B. Dean, 1931 to 1955. Visitors began arriving almost immediately. Some brought flowers, others left poems, photos, or small tokens of remembrance. Over time, the gravesite became a pilgrimage spot for fans from around the world. People came to stand in silence, to cry, to whisper their thanks to a man who had spoken to their deepest feelings through a movie screen. Even now, decades later, fans still visit Fairmount, leaving lipstick kisses on the headstone or placing red jackets and photos in the grass. The town honors Dean each year with a memorial service and a museum dedicated to his life. Though his time in Hollywood was brief, his roots remained in Indiana, And it's there, in that quiet resting place under the Midwestern sky, that James Dean found peace. The man who lived fast, loved deeply, and burned bright was laid to rest in the very soil that had first shaped him, forever a part of the land, the people, and the legacy he left behind.
James Dean's death marked the end of a short life, but the beginning of a cultural legend. Even before Rebel Without a Cause hit theaters in October 1955, the buzz around Dean was strong. But after the film's release, just weeks after his fatal crash, he became a myth. Audiences, especially young people, saw themselves in his performances. He was fragile, angry, confused, and searching, all things they felt but rarely saw on screen. With only 3 films, Dean had done something remarkable. He had redefined what it meant to be young in America. He wasn't polished like the matinee idols before him. He was messy and human. And because he died so young, that image froze in time. He would never grow old, never make mistakes, never fade. To a generation on the edge of change, rock and roll, civil rights, rebellion, Dean became a symbol. He stood for those who didn't fit in, who questioned everything, who wanted more from life than what they were told to accept. His face was now on posters, in dorm rooms, and in the hearts of millions. In the years following his death, the legend only grew. Film schools began studying his performances. Writers and artists referenced him as the spirit of misunderstood youth. Andy Warhol made prints of his image. Bob Dylan called him a hero. Even decades later, musicians, actors, and directors continued to name him as an influence. His life story was retold in books, documentaries, plays, and tribute songs. Biographers tried to uncover the real man behind the myth, but part of Dean's power came from how little the world truly knew him. His mystery became part of the magic. The red jacket from Rebel Without a Cause became a pop culture relic. Photos of Dean walking in the rain in Times Square or leaning against his Porsche became iconic. His posture, his stare, his smirk all became visual shorthand for rebellion, coolness, and sensitivity. Hollywood had never seen anyone quite like him, and the public couldn't let go. He had given the world just a glimpse, and that glimpse was enough to make him immortal. Over time, James Dean became more than just an actor. He became a symbol of youth frozen in time. Generations who weren't even born when he died still connected with him. In a world constantly changing, Dean remained the same. Young, passionate, misunderstood, and unforgettable. His legend was helped by the brevity of his career. He left no bad films, no fading roles. Just 3 unforgettable performances and a haunting final chapter. Every frame he appeared in felt like it mattered. His words echoed louder because there were so few. The fact that he died doing something he loved, racing, only deepened the myth. He became the American version of a tragic hero, brilliant, broken, and gone too soon. And because of that, every generation finds him again. In film schools, in music videos, in conversations about what it means to live authentically. The legend of James Dean didn't end on September 30th, 1955. It began. It lives on in anyone who has ever felt out of place, driven by passion, or haunted by dreams.
James Dean didn't live long, but the ripple effect of his presence changed Hollywood and American culture forever. Before Dean, leading men were typically clean-cut, confident, and traditionally masculine. But Dean introduced something different: sensitivity wrapped in rebellion, strength laced with vulnerability. His characters didn't have all the answers. They questioned, hurt, and pushed back against authority. This struck a nerve, especially with post-war youth in the 1950s, who were beginning to feel a growing distance between themselves and the older generation. Dean's performance in Rebel Without a Cause became a blueprint for how teenage rebellion could be portrayed with emotional honesty. Suddenly, the quiet misfit had a voice, and it looked and sounded like James Dean.
Hollywood took notice. Young actors who followed him, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Al Pacino, and later Leonardo DiCaprio, were all shaped by Dean's style. His naturalism, his subtle expressions, and his willingness to expose pain on screen opened a new path for generations of performers. Beyond acting, James Dean became a symbol, an icon of cool, introspection, and resistance. Fashion designers copied his look: the leather jacket, the white t-shirt, the jeans, the tousled hair. That signature style still defines classic cool today. Even people who have never seen his films recognize his image, his posture, his stare, the way he leaned against a wall or sat on a car. These became symbols in photography, advertising, and pop culture. Artists from Andy Warhol to Banksy have used Dean's face in their work. Musicians, too, referenced him constantly. The Beatles, David Bowie, Madonna, and Lady Gaga all name-checked Dean in lyrics or interviews. Bob Dylan especially credited Dean as a key inspiration for his own identity and sound. Dean's spirit, restless, questioning, poetic, was absorbed into the DNA of rock and roll, indie cinema, and youth countercultures around the world. In France, the New Wave directors admired his rawness. In Japan, fans created entire clubs in his honor. His legacy became global not because of marketing, but because of something deeper, something honest and human in how he lived and performed. Decades later, James Dean remains relevant because his influence never faded, it evolved. His performances are still studied in acting schools as examples of emotional truth. Film critics continue to analyze the quiet power of his scenes, the way he used silence in small gestures to say everything. Meanwhile, his story of sudden fame, intense passion, and early death remains one of the most compelling narratives in celebrity history. He is often grouped with Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, figures who became larger than life, even in their absence. But Dean stands apart because he left so little behind, just 3 major films and a handful of interviews, yet he left so much impact. Every time a film dares to show raw emotion, every time a young actor breaks the mold, every time someone chooses to live honestly rather than follow rules, they carry a piece of James Dean with them. His cultural shadow stretches far beyond the 1950s. It lives in rebellion, in freedom, in the search for meaning. And that is why, nearly 70 years after his death, James Dean remains more than just a memory. He remains a symbol of what it means to live true.
James Dean was only 24 years old when his life ended, but the dreams he left behind were big and still unfolding. In the final months of his life, Dean was thinking beyond acting. He had begun talking to friends and mentors about directing one day. He was fascinated by storytelling, not just from an actor's point of view, but from behind the camera. He admired directors like Elia Kazan and wanted to understand every part of the filmmaking process. Dean also had plans to write, possibly screenplays or even short stories. He carried notebooks filled with ideas, quotes, and sketches. One friend said Dean was always chasing something bigger than the moment. He never saw acting as a job. For him, it was a path toward understanding human nature, emotion, and life itself. He dreamed of building his own creative space, a workshop or studio where he could paint, write, and experiment with film. These dreams weren't vague wishes. They were quietly in motion, growing day by day, until time ran out. Dean's career was just beginning to expand when tragedy struck. After East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant, he had earned the respect of directors and critics. Warner Bros. Was preparing to offer him more leading roles. Several projects were already in discussion. There were rumors he might star in a film adaptation of The Wayward Bus by John Steinbeck, or Some Came Running by James Jones. He also expressed interest in playing Billy the Kid in a serious Western that explored the outlaw's psychology rather than his legend. Dean wanted to move away from being typecast as just the troubled youth and prove he could handle diverse roles: romantic, comedic, intellectual.
He told friends he hoped to work in Europe someday, especially in Italy or France, where filmmakers were experimenting with more personal and artistic storytelling. The tragedy of his death isn't just that he was gone, it's that he was right on the edge of becoming even more than what people had already seen. But beyond the films, the scripts, and the possible awards, Dean's unfinished dreams were also deeply personal. He was searching for peace, for love, and for a place to call home. He had moved from town to town, set to set, always chasing the next thing. Fame had given him recognition, but not rest. Dean once said, "What better way to die than in pursuit of something you love?" A line that haunts many who remember his passion for racing and the accident that ended his life. But the line also speaks to the heart of who he was, someone who refused to settle, who lived for intensity and honesty. He dreamed of building a life where he could be more than a public image. He wanted real connections, a family one day, and the freedom to create without compromise. These dreams didn't die with him. They remain suspended, frozen in time. And in remembering them, we're reminded not just of what James Dean achieved, but the world lost when he was taken so soon.
Even decades after his death, James Dean continues to feel strangely present in modern times. His image remains instantly recognizable, a brooding face framed by tousled hair, cigarette in hand, eyes filled with questions. For younger generations who never saw his films in theaters, he's still a cultural reference point. His style continues to shape fashion, photography, and advertising. The red jacket from Rebel Without a Cause has become a timeless symbol of cool and rebellion, reproduced again and again in media. Actors today, from Timothée Chalamet to Dane DeHaan, have been compared to Dean, whether in looks, attitude, or screen presence. His emotional honesty, his quiet vulnerability, and his refusal to conform have all aged well, perhaps even become more important in a world increasingly shaped by curated identities and social media masks. In a time when authenticity is rare, Dean's rawness feels more relevant than ever. He didn't play a version of himself, he brought himself to every role. That kind of truth still inspires. Technology has also brought James Dean into the modern spotlight in new and sometimes controversial ways. In 2019, a company announced it would digitally resurrect James Dean using CGI for an upcoming war movie. The news sparked major backlash. Many actors, directors, and fans argued that Dean's legacy should be left untouched, not recreated through digital manipulation. They believed his 3 original performances were complete expressions of his talent, and any attempt to revive him would cheapen the truth of what he left behind. The debate sparked wider conversations about digital ethics, legacy rights, and the soul of performance. While the industry continues to explore virtual actors and AI recreations, James Dean remains at the center of this discussion, not just because of his fame, but because of the depth and humanity he brought to his roles. His legacy reminds us that great acting is not about perfection or pixels, it's about presence, and that can't be copied. It can only be lived.
James Dean's life was brief, but what he left behind continues to burn, bright and unshaken, like an eternal flame. He didn't set out to become a legend. He was simply a young man chasing something real in a world full of illusions. In just 3 films, he poured his soul onto the screen, leaving behind performances that still feel alive decades later. His characters weren't superheroes or polished leading men. They were raw, uncertain, vulnerable. That honesty resonated in 1955, and it still resonates now. Dean didn't try to be perfect, he tried to be true, and that truth became his legacy. Whether playing Cal in East of Eden, Jim in Rebel Without a Cause, or Jet in Giant, he captured emotions that live in all of us: loneliness, hope, fear, love. He gave everything in every scene, not knowing how little time he had. His flame wasn't built to last forever, but it was built to shine while it did. Over the years, many have tried to explain the magic of James Dean. Some say it's the tragedy of a life cut short. Others believe it's the mystery, the sense that we never got to fully know him. But those who really watch his work, who listen to his interviews, and who visit Fairmount to walk where he once walked, know that Dean's power comes from something deeper. He represents the part of us that longs to live authentically, no matter the cost. He was flawed and restless, unsure of his place in the world. That's what makes him timeless. Every generation faces those same feelings. Every generation searches for a voice. And somehow, through the flicker of old film reels and black and white photographs, James Dean still speaks. His face, his stare, his silence, they remind us that we're not alone in our doubts or our dreams. His life, though short, became a light that others still follow. James Dean's story didn't end on the highway outside Chalame. It lives on in the students who study his craft, the artists who wear his influence, and the fans who still feel a connection to the young man in the red jacket. His grave in Indiana remains a place of pilgrimage, not just for what he achieved, but for what he represented. That quiet plot of earth holds more than a body. It holds a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and raw emotion. Dean once said, "If a man can bridge the gap between life and death, if he can live on after he's dead, then maybe he was a great man." By that measure, he was not just great, he was unforgettable. The flame he lit continues to glow across time, not as a memory of the past, but as a light for the future. And as long as people dream, struggle, and search for meaning, the name James Dean will never fade. His flame is eternal.